You are listening to the Simple Success Podcast. Why is the stock market soaring during a pandemic? Hello, everyone. This is John with the Simple Success Podcast, financial life coaching from a happiness perspective. Because we know you want to show us some serious love in return for the tremendous benefits you get from us, please head over to https://anchor.fm/ Simple Success, that's one word, Simple Success, support. There, you can choose from a $9.99 per month investor level of support, a $4.99 per month level, or a basic intro level of just 99 cents per month. That's not much when you compare it to a stockbroker rate, and this is so much more sensible. To leave us a voice message, which just might see the light of day in a future podcast, go to https://anchor.fm/ Simple Success. Again, that's one word, Simple Success, message. I won't repeat those links because weird, and anyway, show notes. I could chant like a Buddhist monk or something like that, or I could just answer questions for you and help you do the greatest thing that you could ever do in your life. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to start today with Murphy Week. This is the Murphy Week portion of the podcast. I call it that because it comes from Dr. Joseph Murphy's book, How to Unleash the Power of Your Subconscious Mind. Some of you listening right now have a copy of that book since we sent it to you. In that book, Dr. Murphy leads us on a journey through an entire year with a positive affirmation for each of the 52 weeks. What's coming right now is where we are right now. So don't you get the wrong idea. I'm focused on helping you with real-world results. The meditative, even wishful thinking feeling that this can generate in some people is not there to mislead you, but rather to open yourself up to the idea that success comes from believing that you can. The relevant phrase for this week? From week 2, I can achieve all things through the power of my subconscious mind. Now that we have that down, and I'm kidding when I say that, because a lot of practice is necessary before we get anything down, we go to a question that lots of people ask. And that question, as you've no doubt discovered, spoiler alert, is the title of this episode. Let's get right to it. Why is the stock market soaring during a pandemic? That's a really important question to answer, but it's not the scope of this podcast. Why? Because it's not relevant to being successful. It is something we need to be aware of, though, because it's where our mind might go. Instead of answering the question about why the stock market is soaring during a pandemic, our minds probably drift off to seemingly related questions like, how long will the COVID-19 pandemic last? What are the effects of COVID-19 on my mental health? We don't know. You don't know. I don't know. Dr. Fauci doesn't know. Well, he probably has a more scientific understanding of the question and the answer, but he doesn't know the answer. Instead, he's relying on history and his scientific training, and that's okay. In our case, though, it's not relevant to what we're talking about. What we're talking about is being successful in investing. And when our minds drift, we have to bring them gently back to the focus. Oh, we could go off on all kinds of different tangents. Things like, are face masks required where I live? Maybe they are. Maybe they aren't, but in either case, it's not relevant. Our brains go there, but it's not relevant to what we're trying to accomplish. Speaking of where people's minds go, we often go on a completely opposite tangent. It has nothing to do with health concerns. It's more back to basic investing concerns, like, is it a good time to buy stocks? Or even, what are stocks? Well, we'll get to that, but that's not what we're talking about right now, today. Why is the stock market soaring during a pandemic? What better way to answer that question than with our segments? In our Flip the Script segment, our imagination segment, we're going to take our question into an arena where we can answer it by changing the way we look at it. This is an easy way, once we get used to it, of redefining the problem. It's what great thinkers back to Plato's time have always done because it always works. Don't get me wrong, I didn't say it was easy. I am saying that it's worth it. A good way to think about this is found in the idea that the economy, which most certainly has been impacted, the economy is not the same thing as the stock market. Fortunately, there's a tale which tells this better, and that is, think of the economy for a second. Okay, now think of the stock market for a second. No right, no wrong here. Here's the change. Instead of the economy, think of a woman walking through a park. Instead of the stock market, think of a dog being walked by the woman in the park. With me so far? More imagination is required, so we're going to keep going. The dog is everywhere, sniffing everything and excited. The woman is listening to a podcast in headphones. Oops, I meant she's not being mindful. Let's rewind. The woman is trudging along, getting her daily steps, and not particularly excited. Is the picture becoming a little more clear? Yeah, I thought so. The woman and the dog are not the same thing, and they do not have the same goals. Just like the stock market and the economy. So even though we are rightly concerned about the pandemic, we are also attracted to winning, however we define that. The answer, therefore, is that they are not connected. And here's the big thing. We don't need to whine about it. We just need to learn how to benefit and then roll with it. That could take a lot of different forms, but it gets us past the start. This, remember, is training through change, and the change comes through happiness, which leads to confidence. Not just confidence for an investment or a financial thing either. This key attitude works in every area of your life. Remember, this is financial life coaching from a happiness perspective. In this Mantra of the Day segment, we dig down into a story behind an attitude. There's no shortage of great phrases and quotes in the world, but fashioning them in a way we can use to change our entire mindset, in this case our investing mindset, is a complete another thing. Did I say that psychology was everything? There's a great story in Earl Nightingale's Transformational Living in which he talks about a psychologist interviewing people who were preparing to climb a great mountain. I believe it was Mount Everest, but it doesn't matter if it was Everest, Rainier, the Alps, or any other. The most important question the psychologist asked had to do with the explorer's motivation and thought process. He wanted to know whether or not each of the possible leaders of the exploration could make it to the top. No, would make it to the top, and he listened to their answers. Most of them answered with platitudes such as, "I'm sure going to try," or "I'm going to give it my best shot." But one of them said, "Yes, I will." And that's what you have to take away from this. Yes, I will do this. Put this attitude in your mind. Repeat it over and over. That's what I did, and it works. The rabbit hole. This is the part of the podcast where I'm learning to put those tangents we often go on. I know how that works because I do it all the time. I had to create this segment to have a place to put those tangents, with the idea of tying them into the topic of this episode. Maybe you like that. If not, then maybe I'll learn to put those tangents into my trash can instead and call it good. After all, there are pluses to everything, if we just look for them. I'm not going down the rabbit hole this week, but that's probably because I'm currently paying attention to it. In general, anything that you find distracting, whether happily distracting or unhappily distracting, which can delay you from taking action, is probably a rabbit hole. Shh, that comes from Alice in Wonderland, by the way. We'll talk about mindfulness later and how it relates to investing. And we'll talk about repetition and how that relates as well. But the big takeaway on this one is that you can and will win on this, if you think you will. This transparency section is the part of the podcast where we tell you what's different, what's behind our question, what's changing in our podcast or our organization. I give credit to the legendary broadcaster Paul Harvey, who became famous for the rest of the story, as he called it. And the purpose is to reinforce the idea in your mind that it's not a plot and there is no they. Patients in certain sections of certain hospitals aren't real fond of the idea that it's all in their head. Sorry, it's true. Even when you're perfectly well-adjusted, however you might define that, it is all in your head. Everything is in your head, and psychology is everywhere. I should probably trademark that. Simple Success is, and I have not researched the exact facts on this, the 358,727th podcast to launch since 2015. In addition, we give you the best results. Blending investment thinking with meditative and inspirational thinking, connecting real-world events with individual perspectives, and above all, making winning both accessible and relevant to everyone. It's important to have a sense of humor. If you don't believe that, read the show notes. Remember, this is financial life coaching from a happiness perspective. Right after this, we'll explore some more important detail you should know. But for now, use your imagination to help create your story. In this Simple Success podcast, as well as in our webinars and masterclasses, we are very, very much going to want to hear your story. Well, to be real, I mean in future episodes of the podcasts, webinars, and masterclasses. This means your participation is critical to our mutual simple success. It's important to know how you think, what you've thought, what you've tried, and what you've been unsure of trying. As we told you at the beginning, and as you also find in the show notes, we have ways you can contact us. It involves a special link where you can leave us a voice message, which just might see the light of day in a future podcast. We may have an email address for you as well in the future, and we'll let you know when that happens. Together, we're going to make it great. We're going to do what even we didn't think possible. And to remind you, everyone listening can head to that voice message link in the show notes to record a voice message for a future podcast. Anyway, back to the story. So how does this all end up? Like with almost everything, it's too early to tell. Boy, doesn't that sound like a cop-out. But the reality is, we simply don't know what's going to happen. Despite that, we have to go on. We have to get back in the saddle, as they say. Courage is being afraid, but going on anyhow. That's a great quote from former news anchor Dan Rather. I first saw it on a postcard showing a World War II B-24 bomber pilot walking toward his plane on who knew what mission number. How does that relate here? You're right to ask that and to keep me on track. Remember rabbit holes? Anyway, it relates because we're all afraid of what we don't know, and we don't know which stocks are going to soar, as they say, or when. That simply cannot get in the way of doing it. Or rather, we will not benefit, and so therefore we will not be deterred by, you name it. Not enough money, no experience, too cautious, no patience. What we will do is say, yes, I will. Remember Everest, remember the mantra. Remember when I said it's too early to tell? Well, it's not too early to tell what's coming next episode. Next week, we're going to look at a question many people have been asking, and that is, how do you feel now? Of course, we'll spend a few minutes on the long-term importance of that. But for now, remember, long-term patience is not at all the same thing as trying to be trending. In fact, it's more like the opposite. I'm not saying you can't ever be trending or fun. Heck no, you can be both. All you need to do is practice, after which you'll get good. You're here in the Simple Success Podcast, where you've landed well in your search for financial life coaching from a happiness perspective. We come to you on a regular basis with podcasts, webinars, and masterclasses, together aimed at freeing you from the change that the financial industry puts on all of us. Most of us don't even know what those chains are, and in the spirit of this podcast, we're not going to waste time trying to solve problems people don't even know they have. Better, let's go up to common ground here. We can overcome, and we will do so. Join me for the ride of your life in a good way.